Hi, welcome to Keeping It Young podcast, conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. I am Charity, and here is my mom and dad.
Hello, and welcome to Keeping It Young podcast, conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. I'm Dave.
And I'm Bethany.
We are the Youngs. Bethany and I are thrilled you have joined us today.
Yes, welcome.
So welcome to the podcast, and just wanted to pause again and say how grateful we are that you are continuing to listen, and we hear from many of you, and we certainly would love to hear from you again. Continue to share and like and do all of that, and we
all the social media things.
We're just really always. I'm always, even our son, he's on Instagram, and I saw recently that someone in our home church had shared in their story that they were listening to the Keeping It Young podcast.
Yes,
and they told us all about it. He was so excited. They're listening to you guys, and we were honored, absolutely honored by every one of you that are listening. We're absolutely honored and just overwhelmed. So thank you for it. Visit keepingityoungpodcast.com. Send us a message, the little microphone right-hand corner, or shoot us an email. Connect with us on social media.
Right.
It would be our honor to hear from you.
Yes.
We're talking about family success, and we're several weeks into this family success thing.
Number 6.
And we don't want to belabor any points, but we do want to be as thorough as we can be, because training our children and having success in the home is one of the most delightfully blessed things you will ever enjoy in life.
Yes.
And Beth and I have just been overwhelmed at how good God's been to us. We haven't been perfect, but it is such a delight right now to have a junior hire on the right path, a happy junior hire. And it's great to have a senior in high school that is happy, and he's becoming a man. He's capable. He's growing. He's maturing.
Right.
He's headed in the direction of serving God with his life.
Yes.
What a delight it is to have a college kid that's engaged in planning for life and training for life. And then our two that are married, we're just overwhelmed that they're serving our God, that they're on their own now doing right. So moms and dads, this pays off. Some of you are raising a little one, and you got a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, or maybe 3 or 4 little ones in your life. You're like, oh my goodness. But the years will fly by.
Yes, they do.
And when you come down the road, it's wonderful.
Yes.
And so we want you to have family success. So we've been talking about many things, and last week we began the series, or the thought here about teaching obedience.
Right.
And we talked about expectation and how that you need to have goals. What do you expect? Do you expect instant obedience, or are you okay with saying it 5 times? When do you want them to obey, and how do you want them to obey? And what may be important in your family may not be important in somebody else's. There's no family should be your standard. The Word of God should be your standard.
Right.
And there are families we know that would do any number of things that Beth and I didn't do with our children, but in their family, their training, their background, their influences, sometimes they're more sensitive about an area than we were, because we're all different. We're all growing. We're all learning. But all of us want to succeed with our family. So our children need to know what we expect, and they learn what we expect by our continual explanation. We are always reminding them. That was the word I use, reminding them when they're younger especially. No, we obey first.
Right.
Johnny, we obey first. Sarah, we obey first. We obey first. We obey happily.
We didn't have a Johnny or a Sarah.
Right, I know that. But, it's a good illustration nonetheless.
Yes, it was.
So
Sorry.
You're always someone's feeling humorous. And we're just always trying to explain.
Right.
Always trying to explain. Always trying to remind.
Or just bringing them back to the fact that we obey first and fast with a happy face.
And as they get
heart.
older, the explanation can be more detailed, and so that our children know the why. Why do you not allow them to have social media? Why is it that they can't spend the night there? Why do they have to carry their Bible to church? Any number of things can fall into place there.
Yes.
So then what we talked about, and this is where we want to spend the rest of the day today, is the word correction.
Correction.
All negative behavior has to receive correction.
Yes.
And our job as parents, and people get, how do I say this? People can get really weird about this one. Like Beth and I were in a conference years ago, and a speaker said, and this was, like it's supposed to be a shock value statement. He said, this parenting thing is really hard. Even God, who is a perfect parent, had children who rebelled. And the idea there was, you should just expect your kids to rebel, and good luck, and hopefully at least 1 or 2 of yours will turn out okay. And I thought on that for what in the world? It's true that God is a perfect father.
Yes.
That's not deniable. It's also true that God's children rebel.
Yes.
because for all have
sinned
and come short of the glory of God.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I've always noticed about God is he corrects disobedience.
Mm-hmm.
He always does. And you can either correct it on your own by going to his word and allowing his word to lead and guide your life, by listening to the Holy Spirit, by responding in a preaching service. Or the Bible is very clear that as a child of God, there comes a day in your life, God will correct it.
Yes.
You will suffer the consequences of your negative behavior. So moms and dads, don't let some off-the-wall odd statement discourage you from training and correcting your children.
Right.
You're not a perfect parent, but you are called of God to correct your son and daughter.
Right.
So that they learn obedience and have a happy heart and live for God all the days of their life. We gave you last week the verse that says, correct thy son, and he shall give thee rest, he shall give delight.
Yes.
Bethany read that for us, and she reminded us of the verse that says, foolishness is bound in the heart of our child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him. Now, we're going to start today with Proverbs 23 with a verse that's a little difficult.
Yes, culturally.
It culturally offends our sensibilities because it uses the phrase, beat him with the rod. And I just want to define the word right up front. It does have the idea of to spank because it means to strike. It means to spank, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But it's a word that's even bigger than just spanking. It has the idea of to conquer or to subjugate. To conquer is the word I like. Because and we even use that word in that same. Some people are so offended by this word, but we use it all the time. My son will say, "Oh my goodness, Florida Gators beat Auburn," or whatever.
Right.
Or somebody will say, my team beat such and such team, or my son beat. Well, if you took that literally, your son, why are you celebrating that your son, beat somebody? Well, it means they conquered. They won. And this word beat him with the rod, this phrase is an awkward phrase. It's very specific in its meaning, but it's not nearly as negative as the culture we live in wants us to think it is. In fact, it's not intended to be negative at all.
Right.
It's the way God has chosen and helped us to know how to train our children to be obedient. So read those two verses for us, sweetheart. Proverbs 23, 13 and 14.
It says, withhold not correction from the child, for if thou beat him with the rod, he shall not die. Thou shalt beat him with the rod, and shall deliver his soul from hell.
That's tricky, isn't it? That just sounds so...
It does. It doesn't sound right to, especially in our American, 2020 minds.
Yeah.
No, we wouldn't think that way at all. And even as a Christian parent, you would not want to think of actually beating your child. But in the way that David just explained it, conquering, we are going to win this battle over obedience. So that if you directly disobey me, we're going to have some correction that will show you that mom and dad are going to win and you will be obedient.
Yes, and because of the way that phrase in its modern usage, that word, it does have a negative connotation because he's not saying here that any dad or any mom has a right to beat their child.
No.
Child abuse is always wrong. Beating a child, smacking a child, demeaning a child, locking a child in a room, kicking a child, bruising a child, damaging a child is always wicked, is always perverted, is always wrong.
Absolutely.
And furthermore, is illegal.
Yes, it is.
There's no way around it. It is illegal. And a dad, if your idea of training a child is you get angry and you smack a child up the side of the head, then you are illegal and you are wrong.
Right.
You're absolutely, that is not what he's talking about here. He's talking about winning our children and conquering their error so that our children, with a happy face and a happy heart and a loving, tender Christ-likeness, will serve the Lord all the days of their life.
Right.
And so that is our goal here. And here's another verse. Drop down there, sweetheart, of Proverbs 29:15. Do you see that one on our list?
Let's see here. I do.
Yeah, read that one for us.
The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings his mother to shame.
Notice that he combines the rod and the reproof. I've often said one of the ways to look at that is speaking and a spanking. If you can correct your child simply by speaking, then you've won.
Absolutely.
You have beat the enemy.
That's right.
You've won.
You've conquered.
So, you may be able to say to your son, hey, son, don't do that again. And your son says, yes, Daddy, yes, Mommy. Or she says, yes, Daddy, yes, Mommy. And it's over. Because you just, by speaking, gave your child wisdom to know how to handle this is wrong, this is right, don't do wrong again.
Right.
If you won, then you've won. There's no reason to follow up with that or to get all, all bent out of shape over that. Speaking is part of the training process. Talk to your children.
Right.
And remind them and correct them with your voice. Don't get angry. Don't blow up.
Right.
But you can say very firmly, in a controlled way, say to your son, you may not do that.
Right.
And the change of tone.
Right.
The sincerity and the seriousness. So he says here, reproof gives wisdom, but he also says the rod.
Yes.
And that is true that it does involve a spanking. Now, if you're of any age at all, that there was a time in our culture where spanking was considered the very normal part of training a child.
Right.
It really wasn't until a few years ago that men like, you've heard of Dr. Spock and men like that, came along and said, well, there's no way you should ever spank a child. That is a negative matter. The weird thing is that prior to the teaching that spanking was wrong, children were happier, children were more thankful.
Right.
Children were very successful in life. They were hard workers. Many of them were married easily by the time they were in their early 20s at the latest, had a family, had a home, had a house, had a car, had a full-time job. We in our culture changed and said, well, we're not going to do anything. We're just going to let our children figure it out on their own. We leave them to themselves.
Right.
And the results have been devastating.
Right.
Our public schools, teachers will quit because I can't control the children. You can't teach children that will not obey.
Right.
And it's just a devastating. I know men who are bosses, who own businesses, and in the business, they're struggling because they can't.
Right.
They can't keep employees because there's a kid who will not obey.
Right.
And do you want to buy food from a business where the kid working there will not obey the laws of the health department?
No.
And so this has massive ramifications.
Yes.
And basically, let's just talk about it. If your child knows what you expect, let's say, and I would say this about spankings. I think spankings are biblical, but not everything is a spanking matter.
True.
Life is filled with accidents.
Yes.
Children spill things at the table.
Yes.
They say things they shouldn't say. Not everything's a spanking matter. So you simplify it down to correction. The word is correction. In our home, disobedience was a matter of correction.
Yes.
And lying
Yes.
was a matter of correction. Unkindness, unthankfulness. And our children knew that. If you break this command, if you go beyond this law,
Right.
then there will be ramifications to that.
Yes.
And spankings were normal in my life, and Bethley's life, and all of our friends. Our parents spanked us, and even neighbors would do it. Back in those days, when I was in elementary school, our teachers would spank us. The principal would spank us.
Right.
Then they would write a letter home to your parents and tell your parents what happened, and your parents would spank you because you don't go to school and get in trouble. You don't do that.
Yes.
You're my kid. My kid doesn't go to school and get a spanking. So how do you do it in this generation? Well, first of all, you're going to have to be very wise about it and very aware of the fact that in our culture, there are many folks that will frown upon it.
Right.
And maybe you have to do it exactly correct, very, very wisely.
Yes.
And see, I would say in the privacy of your home,
Yes.
I would say you choose a pediatrician that agrees with you about training your child, a Christian doctor that will encourage you and help you. I had one guy write me recently, and he said, there's no way we could do that because my kids have a teacher at school that if they did that and they told their teacher, they'd report me. I personally then would put my kids in a private school because correcting my child so that my child will grow up to love God and live for God and serve God is worth whatever price I have to pay to get my child to that place. And the idea, too, is that you parents of teenagers, this is about young children. If you teach your child to obey when he or she is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, there's no reason that you're going to have to be punishing the child with the rod when they're 15 or 16. And that just makes kids angry. That embarrasses them. That frustrates them. Can there be a place for that? I suppose so.
Yes.
But it ought to be a massive exception to the rule. These are things you want to win when they're pretty small.
Right.
And it's not a matter, in the old days, they would just, take a switch or a belt and just wear you out is the word they would use. That's not wise in our culture. But
and that's not the goal.
That's not the
correction
goal.
either.
The goal is to say, okay, did you do wrong? Then you have to have a negative consequence for what you did wrong.
Right.
And in our family, we would use an object, not our hand, but an object that was flexible enough that it would not
sting.
damage.
Right.
Firm enough to sting, flexible enough that there was no damage involved. Right. And really, usually just one swat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how many times have we asked you not to lie and you keep lying? And if you lie again, then we're going to have
some correction.
Mm-hmm. And we have a friend of ours who would call it a timeout. and different friends have done it different ways, but we would say to our child, we're going to have to give you a spanking.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's angry. Nobody's upset.
No.
We're correcting.
Mm-hmm.
And so if the child, they will not listen to your voice, then you pause everything in private, quietly, mom and dad together if possible. Mm. You take the child by the hand and you spank them. You give them a swat. It ought to sting.
Yes.
To say, oh my goodness, really it's an amplified consequence of a negative behavior before the negative behavior is life-threatening.
Right.
And so by giving a little swat to a 3-year-old that says, oh my goodness, if I do wrong and I get that stung a little bit, I'm done with this. Be wise about this. Be very wise, parents. Be very wise, but you have to train your child and correct their behavior. And so the rod is a huge word in the Bible and a very powerful word, and it is it's not happy, it's not easy.
No.
It's one of the least favorite parts of parenting, but it is vital.
Well, it's also biblical, and so I think if you're listening and it makes you cringe on the inside to think, I could never spank my child. And some people would say, raise my hand to my child. You don't raise your hand. If you're standing in front of a child and you raise your hand up to threaten them and they can see that hand going up, that's abusive. That's beating a child. What we're talking about is a planned, you did wrong, and so now you know that you will face a consequence for this. And we're going to go to a private place so that you're not embarrassed in front of your siblings and no one's mad. And we are going to give you a little pop on your thigh or on your rear end. That is what we're talking about here. But if you listen and you're cringing, just remember that we're not talking cultural. We are talking biblical here. Right. And so we have to pray and ask the Lord then. Just say, Lord, this seems very foreign to me. This is something that I don't want to do. I don't want to raise my hand, quote unquote, to my child. And so pray about it and ask the Holy Spirit then to show you.
We were very calm.
Yes.
We were conversational.
Yes.
We were pre-planned. This is what we're going to do. And the child knew it.
Yes.
So nobody flew off the handle and tore into a child unexpectedly.
Never.
We would say to our child, if you do that again, you're going to get a swat.
Yes.
And we would give a swat.
Mm-hmm.
And there were several issues in a couple of our children where there was a definite defiance and refusal to obey. Mm-hmm. We talked, we gave a swat, absolute refusal.
Yes.
So at that point, we have a conversation. Mm-hmm. You do it again, you're going to get 2 swats.
Right.
And I think we never went beyond 4 or 5.
Oh, definitely not.
And those were rare for us.
Yes.
And nobody was ever angry. And so we talked beforehand. Mm-hmm. We administered the correction.
Yes.
And then we prayed. And we talked afterwards. And it was over.
And you love on your child.
Over. Mm-hmm. And then you praise when they've won.
Yes.
When your child then obeys first, you praise them for that. Oh my goodness, you've got it. You told the truth.
Yes. Good job. Thank you.
Or you were kind.
Yes.
You said thank you.
Wow, I'm impressed by you.
You praise those, but it does.
I'm proud of you, yes.
To get there does have to be a correction. Hebrews 12, verse 11 is a New Testament phrase about how God deals with us,
right.
But he deals with us in the way of a parent dealing with their child. Listen to this verse, Hebrews 12, 11.
Now no chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby.
Chastening is the same word you find in Ephesians when he says, fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the admonition, the chastening of the Lord.
Okay.
He's letting us know here, this is not fun. Mm-hmm. This part of parenting is painful, it's sorrowful, but what he wants you to know is that the fruit is worth the pain.
Yes.
A little bit of pain, a little bit of, oh my goodness, that hurt. Oh my goodness, I'm I'm being punished. I'm being
Right.
corrected. That pain brings forth fruit. And he says afterward, it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby. And the word exercise is a very strong word. Literally in the Greek language, it means to practice naked. And it was referring to those who practiced naked in the Colosseums. They were the real genuine deal. They were the ones
Olympic Games.
working. In the Olympic Games, they were the ones working to win. They were overboard.
They got skin in the game.
Skin in the game, literally skin in the game. And the picture there is that mom and dad, you've got to get exercise. There's a lot of work that's going to go involved in this.
Yes.
Of saying to your son, we don't lie. And if you cannot lie, son, do you understand? Lying is wrong. The Bible says lying lips are an abomination to the Lord. I'm the rod and reproof. I'm using the reproof. But my child has this ongoing tendency to lie. There has to come a point in which I say, okay, you're going to continue to lie. Then we have to up the correction.
Right.
And the Bible says here, then you use the rod. You've got to win. You've got to conquer the error in the child's heart. And if you conquer it when the child is 5, is it painful? Yes. Is it unhappy? Yes. Is it just an absolute problematic, difficult thing to do? It is. It is.
Yes.
But a whole lot better to win when they're 5 than a child to be punished at the age of 25 for lying on a job.
Right. Absolutely.
Or to be arrested for lying about his finances in a business transaction.
Right.
And so we're correcting when they're 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that age,
right,
so that they won't be corrected when they're an adult, where
Yes.
it really has negative consequences.
Yes.
If you have questions about that and we can help you with that, reach
Yes.
out to us. We'd be happy to talk with you more about it. Let's close today's sessions, though, with some do's and don'ts about this teaching of obedience. Here's some. You start us off there, sweetheart.
You should start very early.
Very early. Even
Yes.
when we brought the child home and, you're changing a little baby's diaper, your tone of voice can be used to reprove.
Yes.
No. And we would, call the child by name. Joshua, no.
Yes.
And so even a little baby that's stiffening up because, I don't want my diaper changed.
Right.
The diaper has to be changed. But your tone of voice can correct even an infant's behavior.
Right.
And as they get, older, your no, we've mentioned that word, your definite no, no, the tone of voice you use. And you just start early.
Yes.
And as your child begins walking, and they're not going to understand that they can't touch the wood stove. That's going to burn their hand.
Right.
But if you start very early teaching them that when I say no, I mean it.
Right.
And use the tone of voice, the rod and reproof, use the voice. And if a child will not obey, then a little rod can give a little sting.
Right.
A rod can correct.
Right.
And that's an object that's just kind of flexible. It stings a little bit, but it doesn't bruise or do any damage. That's important. Start very early.
Yes.
Training very early. Any further thought on that one?
Just as soon as you can, talk with your child. And as you're talking with them, even as a little one, coming home from the hospital, they get used to that voice. I think we talked about it already. They get used to that voice, and then they can respond to it, and they get used to the different tone. There is a teasing, a fun tone that mom and dad have, and then there is a firm tone. No, you will not do that.
That's very good.
Okay.
The second one?
Use the rod wisely, but even sparingly.
Sure. A lot of parents, we've been around some parents and their zeal or their frustration spank about everything.
Right.
And it's like, my goodness, for crying out loud. I don't know that needs to happen that way.
No.
Use it wisely, meaning make sure you're not violating your child, you're not embarrassing your child, you're not angering your child.
Right.
So use it sparingly, but use it wisely.
Yes.
And make sure that you know exactly what the spanking matter is and exactly how you're going to handle it before the issue occurs.
Yes.
And if you don't know how, then don't do anything until you figure out exactly how to handle the situation.
Absolutely.
All right?
So let's see. Do use reproof as often as it will work.
Sure.
So that's just using your voice. If you can use your voice and correct your child, then do so. If you do get to the place where your voice is not working and your child is determined to disobey, then it's time to take a little break and use some correction.
Sure. The fourth one is don't discipline in anger.
Oh, yes.
It's a big one.
Definitely not.
If you're flying off the handle, if you're raising your voice and yelling at a child, if you're mad as mad can be about this, then you're the one in need of correction.
Yes.
So the point is, and I had a pastor years ago catch me off guard, and he said, well, if the people in my church never got angry, they would never train their children. My thought was, well, according to the Bible, you're not training your children if you're angry.
You're not.
Because the Bible is very clear that the wrath of man cannot work the righteousness of God.
Right.
We want our children to serve God righteously. Our
Yes.
anger will never accomplish that.
Right.
And so make no bones about it. Don't discipline anger.
Right.
It
If
will
you need
not
to.
work.
And sometimes you're just frustrated. You can't believe that your child disobeyed you yet again in that one area that you think you have made very clear. And if that's true and you need to take a break, that's fine. Send your child to their room. They can cool off in their room, and you can go cool off in yours before you administer any correction.
Very true. Don't discipline in public.
No, and that's all part of using the rod
wisdom.
and reproof wisely. Yes.
Do plan to be done with obedience training sooner rather than later.
Right. And
Get
that's
it
all part of
done.
getting into it early. As soon as you can, you start using your voice to correct that child. You don't sit there and say, oh, that's cute. And then by the time they're 10, it's not cute anymore.
Very true.
So if you start early, then you can be done with correction a lot earlier.
Right. And let's wind it down here just really quickly. Do be consistent. You have to every time mean it.
Yeah. That's hard.
Every time. Find out what are you correcting and consistently respond to it the same way every time.
Every time.
Because if, 1 week you're okay with your child, lying, and the next week you blow up over the lying, the child will be confused.
Right.
Your inconsistency will cause them to harbor resentment and maybe even turn to bitterness and anger in their own heart. Mm-hmm. Do be consistent. Do be on the same page as your spouse.
Oh,
this is a tricky one. We could talk about that one a long time.
Yeah,
maybe
we'll talk about that one later too.
Be as much as possible. Be on the same page. And if you're, if you're in a divorce situation, single parent, that's going to have some challenges.
Yes.
Get some wisdom and advice about that if you need it. But you that are married, talk it over and know exactly what the two of you together expect out of your child and how you're both going to handle it the same way every time.
Right. And if you get into a situation and you are disagreeing about something, then defer. Yeah. I would say defer to the other one, because if you do not have a united front in front of the child, then that will also lead to some rebellion or some power playing against parents.
And let's just give one more here. Take a little bit longer than we intended to be, but do use wisdom in special situations or even in some socially constructed issues. And let me just kind of throw these at you briefly. Things like situations where there's a divorced parent or single parent. Those are going to be some special situations that you need to think through, pray through, maybe get advice about. Don't ever be afraid to ask for counsel.
Right.
You need help, get it. We're all in this together.
Yes.
And the special situations that our culture deals with are things like ADD or ADHD. Listen to me, moms and dads. If your son or daughter has ADD or they've been diagnosed with ADHD, here's what our culture tends to say. Well, we excuse them. Well, my son has ADD. That's why he's...
Yeah, they can't obey.
That's why I can't, doesn't work for my kid. He has ADHD. I want to suggest to you that if your child does have ADD or ADHD, that training is doubly essential.
Yes.
It's not a matter then of taking your hands off and saying, well, there's nothing we can do. A child with ADD can learn to obey and listen and do right.
Right.
A child who has ADHD can learn to listen, to obey, and to do right. You can correct, you can train. I think more of us when we were younger had it than they just didn't diagnose it back then. But even though we all had ADD and ADHD, we had teachers in school that would train us. No, this is how you respond. This is how you do it. Their consistency, their quiet voice. We learn to have self-control and self-denial, even if your child has ADD and ADHD.
Right. Yes.
So those are special situations. There's a lot more can be said. We're out of time, and we wanted to finish the obedience one today. Thank you so much for listening.
Yes.
And giving us an extra few moments today. If Beth and I can serve you, help you, shoot us an email.
Right.
Go to keepingityoungpodcast.com. Send us a little message there. We will do our very best to help you, to serve you, to answer any questions you may have.
Yes.
And it would certainly be our honor to do so. So this is Keeping It Young podcast, and we are very, very happy that you've joined us today, and we pray that you'll have a blessed day.
The Keeping It Young podcast is a Bax 5 Media production. All rights reserved.